What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the December 2019 format. Now, YCS Milan just concluded this past weekend, and it's one of the last big events until we get the new ban list. I think all we have left now is Pro Play Tour Las Vegas taking place in a few weeks, and then YCS Sydney in January, like right before we're supposed to get the new ban list. So not many big events. However, we do still have plenty of regionals taking place around the world. So if you're still trying to get your invite, I want to make sure you guys are up to date on the latest meta trends. And speaking of Pro Play Tour Las Vegas, it's taking place on December 15th, the same weekend as a Konami sanctioned regional on the 14th, so 2 events in 1 weekend. That's pretty sweet. Only $20 to enter, $2,000 in cash will be awarded out to the top cut, and if you get your invite, you're going to be invited to the $10,000 cash prize pool invitational taking place in January. And of course, I'll be there doing live stream commentary coverage for the event as well. So links are in the description if you want to pre-register, and I hope to see you guys there. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So here's your top 32 breakdown from YCS Milan. It was one of the biggest European YCSs we've ever had, the biggest by Italy standards as well. I think it was like 1,900 people or some insane number. And when you look at this top 32, yeah, it's kind of much of the same. Not really too much of a surprise here. Orcust is just continuing to assert its dominance in multiple forms, both in the pure Orcust form as well as the Sky Striker Orcust form. And it shouldn't be no surprise that Sky Striker Orcust managed to take first place. Here is the list for you guys to see here. And I want to take a moment to discuss this because since we're not exactly getting a ban list anytime soon, I'm going to go ahead and say that Sky Striker Orcust is probably going to be the strongest deck of the format until we get the next ban list, so probably the better part of a month. So if you guys aren't already aware of how this deck functions, you definitely should be up to date. It's obviously just Orcust with striker cards, but there's so many other layers of interaction here that make the deck so powerful. It's really why we saw Sky Striker be included in so many other archetypes of the past, because having that engine to facilitate more draw power, more searchability with cards like Widow Anchor and Shark Cannon, especially in a format that's heavily graveyard reliant, just having all these extra draw power cards makes the deck even more consistent, backed by the ceiling that the Orcust cards have. And the thing is, people are still playing pure Orcust as well. Pure Orcust actually has some advantages over the Sky Striker Orcust deck, because with pure Orcust, you actually can do a better job playing around cards like Nibiru the Primal Being, whereas Sky Striker Orcust actually has more difficulty doing so. So Nibiru actually might make its way back into the main deck, even though a bunch of players are citing it for decks like Salamangreat and some of the more heavy combo decks. However, it does have a weakness there, and if you're not prepared to possibly play around a card like Nibiru, then you could get completely blown out if you don't think your opponent is on it. So bear in mind, pure Orcust and Sky Striker Orcust, they're seeing about equal representation. Sky Striker Orcust has won the last 2 YCSs, so it's definitely on the up and up, but it's going to continue to assert its dominance, like I said, and it really shouldn't be no surprise. Now, second place was actually True Draco. I don't think anyone going into Milan would have expected that True Draco was going to take second place at this event, and that's pretty awesome. I will have the deck profile on my channel for you guys soon. He's actually going to be sending it to me, so come and check back if you want to check that out. But I mean, that's pretty awesome to see True Draco almost winning a YCS in 2019. The remainder of this video, I don't really want to focus too much on the rest of the decks here, because realistically, this is all we've already seen already, right? Salamangreat being in the top, Sky Striker Pure being at the top, Thunder Dragon's actually dwindling. I think the more Orcust is going to go up. I think Thunder Dragon actually just continues to fall, even though Colossus kind of hedges against the Sky Striker variant a little bit, just because it kind of hinders their searching power just by a smidge. But you've got some other decks in here as well. But I want to more so talk about the other decks that we had access to from what information was available, because not a ton of deck profiles came out of Milan, but I want to just briefly discuss the ones that did. So first up, here is the top 8 Thunder list that managed to come out of Milan. It's a pretty standard pure Thunder list, playing the Dimension Shifter, which is pretty great considering there's a lot of graveyard-centered decks like Orcust running around. Thunder just has a difficult time playing against Orcust in general because Dingirsu can just out Colossus so easily, but the deck still manages to do what it does best. I still think it's tier 1, even though its representation is dwindling. In terms of overall representation when you go to an event, a ton of people are still going to be playing not only pure Thunder Dragon, but combo Thunder Dragon, trying to build a massive board that's going to be impossible for you to break. So bear that in mind. But now let's talk about some of the other top 32 decks. So there was a magical musketeer deck, which again, like I've been saying, this deck has been able to top the last like 4 or 5 YCSs or like major events, which is just really odd considering like I don't even think a lot of people would consider this deck like tier 2. Like this is probably Rogue at its finest, but it continues to come out of nowhere, and it's a going second deck that kind of just aims to break your opponent's board and then go in with something like Utopia Double, because most decks in the top metagame leave something like Galatea face up on the field or Sunlight Wolf or a really weak monster that if they can just get 2 level 4s on the field, which is really easy with a card like Starfire, you make Utopia Double, hit him for 10k, and there's really nothing they can do about it. So it's an interesting strategy and definitely something you should at least just look over. That way you understand that if you come against the deck, you know how to play against it. We also have Pendulum finally making its resurgence. Pendulum was on a downturn for a significant amount of time, but now Pendulum has started to consistently topping again. I'm actually curious if that with Sky Striker Orcust doing well, if Pendulum's starting to do well at the same time, because it kind of makes a card like Master Endymion a little bit better when you have a much more spell heavy meta, and when Sky Striker Orcust playing all the spells that it does, you know, maybe that could be a reason. But Pendulum's still doing what it does best, able to make some incredibly impressive boards and still able to go second pretty well too. I mean, Pendulum summoning is pretty good for a reason, and so you definitely should not doubt the power level of a deck like this. Now there's one card that's starting to see a rise in play, and that is Skullmeister. Now remember last video we talked about how DD Crow is starting to see a lot more play, and Skullmeister is kind of like the zenith of the graveyard hate. So why is this? Well, when you look at DD Crow compared to Skullmeister, both cards kind of do the same thing in terms of going after the graveyard, but in different ways. Now DD Crow banishes the card from the graveyard completely, whereas Skullmeister just negates the effect. However, that matters significantly, and especially in the Orcust mirror match. Now for instance, if your opponent has Orchestrated Babel on the field, if you're going to DD Crow one of their Orcust monsters, because they have Babel up, they can just chain the Orcust monster in response and basically dodge your DD Crow, making that card absolutely worthless. But Skullmeister can still just negate the effect, so it doesn't matter if they have Babel or not. It's also a dark like DD Crow, and since a lot of these decks are playing Allure of Darkness, if they don't need the Skullmeister, they can just dig 2 cards deeper into their deck. There's a lot of depth to this card, and again, we don't see it too frequently, but when we do, it can usually be pretty good. The one thing I will say is that DD Crow has a lot more coverage on the overall field, whereas this card specifically is targeting Orcust. So the thing is, if you're expecting to play a ton of Orcust at your locals, regionals, what have you, then Skullmeister is probably the better card. However, if there is going to be a much more wider variety of decks, then Crow might be a bit of a safer option, and you might want to delegate those copies of Skullmeister to your side deck. Now, like I said earlier, there weren't too many deck profiles that come out of the top cut of YCS Milan, surprisingly. I'm not really sure why that was, so I just want to go ahead and show you guys a lot of the decks that almost made it into the top 32 that bubbled, one of them being an Infernoid deck. I've talked about Infernoids time and time again in this heavily graveyard-centric meta that we're in. Infernoids are actually not bad when all of your cards are effectively DD Crows. Obviously, the deck suffers from its own weaknesses, but it's still pretty cool to see a deck like Infernoid go far. It's managed to top YCSs before and almost win one for that matter, but it's going to be a deck that's still lurking around. Just don't expect to see too much of it. Another deck is Cyber Dragon. Cyber Dragon, again, losing a lot of its power with Mermaid getting banned because you can't really play Cyber Dragon Orcust as effectively. You can still play it, obviously, but it's not nearly as good. You're more reliant on cards like Cyber Dragon Naster as well as Orchestrated Return, but the deck is still powerful. Pure Cyber Dragon, I believe, is the deck that was played at Milan, though, specifically, and the thing is, the deck's still perfectly fine. Cyber Dragon's very good at going first or going second and being able to break the opposing boards, especially in a Orcust heavy meta like this. So again, I wouldn't expect to see too much Cyber Dragon like we were seeing maybe a couple months ago, but you might run into one here and there depending on what type of event you're attending. And then we also have Heroes, one of everyone's favorite decks. Being able to main deck Super Poly seems pretty good right now, and having a Dark Law just to be able to stop your opponent's graveyard shenanigans also seems like not a terrible idea either. Now, obviously, Heroes does have their own weaknesses in their own right, but it's still cool to see this deck still just barely scraping the surface and being able to almost claw its way into that top 32. I think it's a pretty okay pick. Again, Rogue at best, you might run into 1, maybe 2 max at any Premier tournament, but just do keep in mind that people are trying out the deck just because it has some interesting interactions with the way the meta is currently shaping up, and you should definitely be mindful of that. Now, another deck that recently topped YCS Pasadena was True King Dinosaur, and here it is again, bubbling YCS Milan. Interesting deck. Again, don't expect to see too many of this, if any at all. Maybe if you're going to a regional, you might see it more commonly, but again, it's a kind of of scary deck going second with cards like Conductor, Tyranno, Double Evolution Pill, just all these really powerhouse cards that are just bombs, and if you can't deal with them, you're just going to get completely overrun. So interesting to see that has like a little bit of an uptick in terms of playability. There's also a Necros player that bubbled the event as well. Necros pops up here and there, but we haven't really seen it do too much as of late. This deck wasn't even running Vanity's Ruler, so this might be more of a going second oriented build. You got stuff like Necros of Trishul and a lot of really good going second cards, so hey, why not, right? There's also a Mech Knight Invoke deck, and what's interesting about this is that he was actually playing Dangers to kind of help bolster the consistency, and I thought that was really interesting because I don't think we've ever seen Dangers in Mech Knight Invoked before specifically. Again, we've seen like a pure Mech Knight build, and we've seen like Invoked kind of in like a deck like Sky Striker, but we haven't really seen Mech Knight Invoked doing too much as of late. So really interesting list just to see the Dangers being incorporated, and obviously it did well for him considering he managed to almost top the event. And then last but not least, there was a Shaddoll Train deck that almost managed to make the top cut as well. Shout out to all the Rank 10 fans out there. They're gonna love this one. I don't really have much to say. Like, I mean, out of all the decks we've discussed, you are probably never gonna see this deck again. I guess I can't really say that because, you know, at regionals, who knows, people might just want to mess around. But again, this is just insane. Kudos to you, my friend, for making it so far, because I think that's absolutely incredible. On a closing note, though, I just want to say I really hope that when we get this ban list coming up in January, that it really shakes up the format, because when you're looking ahead, what do we really have coming up? Well, we have the special edition for Chaos Impact, which gives us the Scrap Link monster, so I guess we could supposedly have Scrap Orcust become a deck, but I think Sky Striker Orcust just far exceeds that deck's capabilities. We get the 6 Samurai Link monster, which, I mean, I guess I don't really think that's going to do anything except maybe have 6 Sam randomly top an event. And then what else? Not really a whole lot. I think we have Ignition Assault at the end of January, and then we have Legendary Duelist that has the one card that bolsters Spiral, but that's kind of it. Ignition Assault doesn't even really have that many game-changing cards aside from like a couple, and it would just be integrated into the archetypes that we have now. So I'm really hoping that this ban list is going to shake things up significantly, because otherwise we might be playing with these same decks for another several months after January, and I think a lot of people are really sick of that. So guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.